hunger, Steve McQueen. Just to his left is the film's producer, Robin Dutch. I think you'll agree that there's a tremendous amount of political, art, historical, and religious content in this movie. There are a lot of things to talk about, and I thought I would just start with a couple of questions and then open it up. Hunger won the Camera d'Or at Cannes last May. Camera d'Or, the award for Best First Film, and it is Steve McQueen's first feature, but of course, Steve McQueen has been making film and video-based installations for quite a few years, many of which also are distinguished by their political content. And I understand that you were going to make a movie or a piece in Iraq in 2003, I believe, and that didn't work out for one reason or another. And that's also the time that you began working on Hunger. So I'm wondering if there's, in any sense, a connection. No. No. How did Hunger come about? The idea of doing theatrical feature.
As I said, when I was 11 years old, it was one of those moments where things just stick in your head, an event where it sort of resonates. And when I was 11 years old, the news was on. My parents always watched the news, always religiously at 9 o'clock. And what happened was there was always an image of this guy on the TV screen, a photograph. Underneath the image was a number, and every night that number would increase. And then slowly I found out that the reason this was going on exactly was the fact that this person stopped eating in order to be heard. At 11 years old, the whole idea of someone who stopped eating, the whole idea of the oral situation, the mouth, and not the intake of food in order to get louder, sort of just resonated with me a bit. And the same year was sort of Brixton riots, and of course I said before, my team Tottenham winning the FA Cup. It was sort of a kind of emotional sort of roller coaster, yeah. And it was just sort of a transitional situation of being 11 years old at that time, in a very highly political situation of 81. Thatcher came in, it was 79 she came in, so there was a lot of turmoil in the early 80s.
But this wasn't something that you would consider doing as a gallery piece or an installation?
No, narrative was very, very important for me for this piece. I mean, it's a simple thing, but for me it's a very important thing, and in some ways it's sort of, it's very simplistic. But what's interesting me is that everyone from from Timbuktu to I don't know Papua New Guinea to Alaska to I don't know Nicaragua knows a story, can tell you a story. Everyone can tell you a story, but not everyone has been sort of steeped in the idea of Western art. And that really sort of interested me that, within feature films, language and story, that it can actually translate and transcend from, a gallery or museum space.
To what degree were you faithful to the physical conditions, the circumstances in the maze?
Very. I mean, that was my main sort of research point, because I was looking for the things which were in between the words in history books. The detail, the sort of texture, the smell, the sort of environment that one sort of lived in or was sort of subjected to for 4.5 years, as well as prison officers having to sort of go into these sort of spaces, these extraordinary spaces, and actually go home afterwards. How these people made this extraordinary situation in a way ordinary, from waking up every morning with the maggots, to be in the summer, which turned flies into blue bottles, to the coal, to these kind of elements, these sort of the common communication, how they did that, and how they smuggled things in and out. And these things were, for me, were the sort of were the essence of the story, really.
But I can't imagine that they actually had photographs of the feces murals and so on, do they?
I mean, there are photographs. There's one piece of documentary footage, ITN footage, independent television news, which lasts about 2 minutes and 31 seconds. That's the only images we have of that. of that piece of history, really.
Let me just ask you one more thing about the making of the film. It's, you know, there's a convention in prison movies of a conversation between a priest and a prisoner, and frankly, I've never seen one more compelling than the sequence in this movie, which, if I'm not mistaken, it seems to be over 20 minutes long. And I'm just wondering how you, as someone, I don't imagine you directed actors as extensively before this piece.
No.
How you got that? So what you told the actors and how many times you had to
I used to think
stage that?
I used to think that actors were sort of overbred racehorses, a bit temperamental, a bit too much actually. But I found out through the process in a way that actors are one of these sort of people that can actually translate humanity, and what they have to do in order to do that is quite remarkable. So you get to a situation where you get to know people on an individual basis, Michael and Liam Cunningham, and it's just a case of conversation, getting us back, both of us, our minds back to the early 80s, that sort of mindset, that kind of, and again, I go back to smell, because I always associate the early 80s with a certain kind of smell, or some kind of, that kind of idea of, I don't know, a British Sunday. I don't know what Sundays would say in the States, I imagine not, where everything was closed and it was miserable, and you know, always rubbish and religious stuff on television. It was awful. And I had that kind of idea of the early 80s, that kind of set and the violence which was going outside, the political sort of struggles. So going back to that time, this is a case of looking at the footage with the actors, discussing, talking, and actually rehearsing, and then more rehearsing, and sort of, you know, getting in, not letting it take off, just leaving on the runway, to a point where it wasn't a case of acting, or a case of, it wasn't a case of acting or a case of presenting, it was a case of being. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to be the acting to be almost like a sphere, which you roll it this way or that way. Wherever you roll it, it's perfect. You know, it's a sphere, so it's perfect. That's how I wanted it to be. You know, and I think often with actors, I get the impression that a lot of the time the directors aren't necessarily honest with them. But for me, I think it's a case of if you are honest with them, that they go as far as you and try to go further, to be absolutely honest. And that's something that I really appreciate.